Hey everyone, welcome to my channel, it's me Gamerturk, and this is the very belated episode for the final Sword Art Online Alicization WoU of Underworld Q&A for episode 23. First off, I really do want to apologize for being this late. Too much stuff was happening, university is starting up again, the second wave of the virus is coming back, and the city Innsbruck is pretty much going into a lockdown pretty soon at the rate things are going. University has started, I have quite a lot of homeworks and stuff to take care of, so, and most importantly, let's not forget, I really want to finish that Licorice playthrough and get it out of the way so I can go back to producing regular content. But yeah, all of that cast aside, this is gonna be the final Q&A for Sword Art Online Alicization WoU of Underworld Part 2. After this, I'm gonna have a separate progressive Q&A based on the questions you have provided on my Progressive Explained video, but that's probably gonna be next week or the week after, so no rush for that. But as usual, we got three types of questions, well actually two types of questions, because I decided to keep this Q&A spoiler free because, well, the series is over and everything future related is massive future related spoilers, so yeah, we're gonna only have normal questions, which are, well, spoiler free, obviously, if you have finished WoU of Underworld, and opinion questions, which are, again, spoiler free, it's just that they are more opinion oriented questions rather than facts that will be featured in the normal questions. And again, I'll probably do a separate Q&A for future related stuff somewhere during this content drought period, so we'll get to that eventually, maybe some Moon Cradle questions, some Unital Ring questions, etc. We'll see, time will tell. But starting with the first question, in the scene when Kirito received the IP address and asks Alice if he can bring Asuna with them, Alice seems to be very annoyed about that. In the anime, we haven't seen, besides a few scenes with Shinon and Asuna, Alice interact with the group, so my questions are, does Alice not yet accepted the fact that Kirito and Asuna are a couple, unlike the other girls like Sugu, Liz or Shinon, since she is the one that for me has the most similar feelings towards Kirito? Let's start with the second part, because in my opinion Alice's feelings are more similar to Shinon's feelings towards Kirito. She looks up to Kirito as the one with the answers, the one provided her the truth, not in a sense that she loves him like Asuna does. With that portion corrected, does Alice not yet accepted the fact that Kirito and Asuna are a couple? She has accepted. I believe I mentioned this back in the episode where Asuna, Alice, Berkuli and the entire army was sitting around the campfire, but the anime watered down a lot of these in a good way. I pretty much enjoy the fact that they watered down Alice's annoying behavior, let's put it that way. But it of course leads to questions like these, which is kind of unavoidable. But from the beginning, I mentioned it back during the explained, Alice's inner monologues were very clear. Even back then, Alice had accepted that Kirito and Asuna were perfectly a couple, and that she had no right to do anything to prevent the two from reuniting. If you remember, Alice was quite hesitant about letting Asuna see Kirito as well. And that mainly stemmed from the fact that Asuna just descended from heavens, literally. Alice is kinda jealous about her beauty. And once she actually descends, you know, everyone does truly believe that she is a goddess because of her beauty and her presence in the battlefield. It just pushes Alice the wrong way. It hits the wrong nerve for Alice, and that is all there is to it. Alice is just jealous of Asuna, but you won't see a whole lot of that in the future as well, as there is nothing weird with that relationship going on. There is no point of conflict at this point. It's just Alice is slightly annoyed. Will these kinds of scenes continue in Unital Ring, or there are scenes in Unital Ring that provide some character development with Alice understanding and accepting the relationship? I believe my answer to the first part actually answered this one as well. I am rusty with these Q&As, am I not? Anyways, I hope I did answer your second question, the first one as well, because otherwise it's gonna be very awkward, but assuming that I did, because I do feel like I did, I am moving on to the next question. This was a spoiler question, but I believe I cut it to a certain extent to answer it in a non-spoiler manner. Is Alice kinda same as other real world type? I mean, when real world people die in Underworld, they can just log back in using another account, but how about Alice now? Is she like that or not? That is actually quite the good question. I probably should have put this into the opinion section because I don't have a specific answer, but technically speaking, we got two separate possibilities for this. Both are actually possible. First off, with the assumption that yes, she is similar because her light cube is no longer part of the light cube cluster, not exactly bound by that programming that deletes the contents of a light cube if they die in Underworld. So if we assume that to be the case, yes, she's much like real people at this point. If she dies in Underworld, she can just log back in with a separate account because her light cube is no longer part of the cluster itself. But then again, that is the assumption. That may not exactly be the case, and just because she has an actual light cube that the system can access directly, maybe she may end up dying if she dies in Underworld. There is no specific answer for this. But yeah, both options are perfectly plausible, and things can go both ways if the story needs it to be, if things come to that somewhere down the line in Unital Ring. Next question. The insignia of the Star King shown in this episode is different than the one shown in Accel World, right? Well, if you really want to go into technicalities, yes, it is very slightly different, with the only difference being the circling line in the middle not existing in the depiction of Sword Art Online anime, which again, Sword Art Online light novels in volume 18, when that insignia was described, that twirling line in the middle didn't exist there either. So yeah, if you want to look at it from a specifically technical standpoint, yes, they look different, but it's such a minuscule difference. It's just an artist's interpretation, I would say, at that point. Next question. So besides the previous comment I put on the video, I have a question regarding the reading order of SAO. Are progressive novels crucial to understanding SAO Unital Ring? No, not at all. Unital Ring is completely separate. There is one returning character from Aincrad that you have missed for such a long time. But no, Progressive is in no way required to understand the contents of Unital Ring. Unital Ring is just a continuation of the series entirely. Progressive is just an expanded retelling of Aincrad. Next question. I'm still confused. What is Professor Shigemura's job in Alicization project? He doesn't specifically have a job in RATH. He just helped build the STL and the connections with the brain, etc. based on his own research when creating Yuuna's digital echo. So no, he's not on the staff list. It was just something like a one-time gig from what we know so far at the very least. The final part of this text, Kikurinko and Kikoka said one of them can't show up yet. I'm assuming you're referring to the very early mention of 3 critical people for this project. No, the third person was specifically referring to Kirito, and he can't show up yet because he's physically brain dead in the real world when Asuna had arrived and cannot be taken out of the STL. That was just a very minor reference to the fact that Kirito was integral to the project itself. Next question, this is about the seed. I still don't understand how the seed created that much land. I know you said something like seed is more than capable of creating additional land if the need arises. Yes, I did say that. Now I get the fact that the seed is being capable of creating more land randomly. Randomly would be too strong of a word. I'd say it creates things based on specific rules. They are not exactly random, because when you're creating a universe simulation, you know, there are rules to be abided by to a certain extent, despite being a game-like simulation. But that didn't happen in this situation. Creating 2 different worlds and space monsters like abyssal horror is too specific to be generated randomly. I am really going way too early with my extensive answers before reading the full questions, but yeah, as I said, it's not exactly random. Like, when people start reaching towards the space, it creates stuff based on that space, you know? There are certain rules that the system follows to generate new content. Remember, the Underworld is now running even without a cardinal system. That is not exactly the case. It's not properly specified exactly in the series, but the world is still running. It's not particularly mentioned how the lack of cardinal exists in that spot, but it still continues pretty much the same way, like the content creation and stuff, it still does happen. Then there is the hardware limitation to mention. The Underworld server and the main visualizer were meant to simulate a relatively minuscule amount of land. Actually, that is not really the case. That's the main reason the main visualizer exists rather than having a fixed code base instead. You see, Underworld is pretty much a collection of memory data, as it was explained all the way back in the first episode of Alicization. So what happens is, main visualizer has all of these memory data in it, and it's basically streaming them directly to the inhabitants. And the same way, the memories of the inhabitants are directly streamed over to the main visualizer in return. So you can think of it something like a new thing has been generated by the system itself, the data has been fed to the main visualizer as well as the inhabitants who have experienced it, and at that point it's no longer simulating per se, but constantly streaming content from one side of the thing to another and collecting it in the main database as well. There's of course certain simulations going on for actual game-like things happening, but the reason they had created Underworld at the beginning as a confined space was not because of their hardware limitation, but rather that they wanted a simulation where the RATH employees could keep a hand on, give them a limited space, give them a limited culture, and then control the things easily by having limited things to min-max. Also, to provide a completely different perspective on your question, you're asking if the hardware is capable of simulating all that much. Well, I'd like to remind you that the hardware is perfectly capable of simulating all of what's happening in Underworld in such a high speed. And now it's completely running on 1-to-1, so I'd say even simulating all that stuff, now it has a huge buffer to take advantage of because it's simply not utilizing all that speed, all that power it has available to itself. So yeah, that's something to think about, I'd say. Size of the simulation and the speed of the simulation, both are things to factor into what's being simulated, how much is being done at a given time on the real world hardware. Next question. Now that Season 3 has ended, let's return to that old question. How do you rate Season 3 compared to previous seasons? This can go into more details other than just adaptation. I'd rather answer this on an entirely separate video where I review the entire Alicization, but that ship has sailed a long time ago. Maybe I'll do it eventually before Progressive comes up, but the gist of it is, the first 4 episodes were decent, I'd say. Especially after the 11th episode, especially after around Fanatio episode, the Alicization really started to take a dump with the severe production issues. War of Underworld Part 1 was quite solid in my opinion. War of Underworld Part 2 started suffering again, which I was expecting it to not, because things were running smoothly, even with the corona going on. Part 2 was actually going quite smooth in terms of both animation and adaptation early on, but then things started to get crammed. The addition of Age and Yuuna scenes took way too much time, and in the end it was not as good as it should have been, in my opinion. But again, I'm coming from the light novel side. Whatever I say, the people who have enjoyed anime so much will feel like I am attacking their opinion by not saying it wasn't as good as I expected it to be. That's that. I'll leave it at that. I never got into Accel World, so should I watch Season 1 and read the novels? The theories and relations between Accel World and SAO have made me too curious at this point. Accel World anime is quite accurate. The only problem is it is quite limited in terms of what it adapts. If you were to ask me, just start by reading it, man. It is a good anime, it is a great adaptation, but at that point you may as well just read the light novels because it doesn't go that far. It won't buy you so much time, so starting from the light novels will give you a better adaptation period, I'd say. If I were to tell you to make an impossible episode, would you do it? To be more specific, that impossible episode would be a cooperative collaboration with Foxen. I'm already dying on the floor as I'm barely typing this out. No intentions of doing a collab with Foxen. until he stops lying, severely clickbaiting, uncontrollably spoiling, or simply stealing art. Until he stops any of that, I have no intention. I don't care how many views that may get me, just no. I don't think he'd be too excited to actually face me as well. Next question, which takes us over to the opinion questions. Would you recommend reading Accel World light novel series? I did watch a couple of episodes of the anime, but didn't like the series that much and dropped it. I don't know why, but I didn't feel like it was the one for me. But because of SAO stuff that's going on, I'm thinking of giving the light novels a chance. Would you recommend reading the light novel Accel World? And did you personally read it? And what did you think? I have not yet read it. I have watched the anime a couple of years ago. There were times I enjoyed it, there were times I didn't enjoy it, especially because Haruyuki, I do not enjoy the narrative all that much. Haruyuki, Chiyu, Taku, oh my god, I am barely remembering their names. It's just, the characters did not interest me all that much, and the anime did not get to the portion with an even more expanded set of characters. You know, I really enjoy following Koyukimo, of course, she's quite fun to follow. Fuko was one of my favorite characters in the series. She barely has any screen time in that first season portion. There are a whole lot more interesting characters in the future, like the other kings and stuff. So yeah, I'd say it will be worth it. It's just depending on your preferences. In my case, I need to get through the introduction phase of Taku, Haruyuki, and Chiyu, etc. to get into the meat of the situation and start getting this actual connections to Sword Art Online, as well as the story of Accel World actually ramping up quite fast. But yeah, until you get to that point, you may end up getting bored if you're like me and don't enjoy the main, well, 3 of the 4 main characters at the beginning of the series. Next question, in your opinion, why does Reki still deny the fact that SAO and Accel World take place in the same universe? I don't know, man, you gotta ask that to him. At this point, I do feel like it's more of just read and learn for yourselves, people. Stop asking me these direct questions kind of a situation. Like, I do get that quite a lot as well. You get such simplified questions that just want a very specific thing, and they expect you to summarize your entire knowledge of, what, 50 light novels like this with a single question. It's just, come on, man. If you really want to know that much, you would have just read it. So if you want to know it that much, just read it, see it all for yourselves. Like, certain questions really do sound different than how you imagine to the person you're asking. When I hear those kinds of questions, I just see someone very lazily asking a question just to get hyped about things they don't even know, and that's just, it's weird, man. I wouldn't have want to answer that question either. That's why I don't answer plenty of those questions myself. Like, to not answer these kinds of questions that Reki receives, like, is SAO and Accel World connected? I do 10, 20, 40 minute videos summarizing entire stories so people can experience the story, so they wouldn't have to ask these kinds of questions. I feel like the question itself is meaningless if you don't experience what the answer actually consists of yourself. I have spoken about this way too much, and I hope I could convey what I wanted to say. Next question. When I first read SAO back in 2018, the story and setting really interested me, but now when I think about the setting of the story, it feels weird, especially now because I started reading Progressive. The story of SAO starts in 2022, and when the time is getting closer to that year, the feeling of reading the story changes. At first it felt like a near future sci-fi story. Now it's not even near future, it's the present, and here we are fighting a console war over 2 teraflops. And from the way the story is going, it won't end before 2022, and even if the main SAO line novel series ends, Progressive still is left. My question is, how will the story and how we as an audience perceive it change after 2022? That is a good question. My answer is, the year is completely irrelevant in my opinion. It can take place in 2020, it can take place in 1980, it can take place in 2040, it can take place in 2100. I couldn't give a fuck. It's the story that matters, not the specific year it is supposed to take place in. It's sci-fi, it's not our world, it's a fictional world with its own set of rules, and we shouldn't be bothered too much if it doesn't match our reality in 2 years. I think the year count is completely irrelevant for what the story stands for. Next question and final question. Do you see a possibility that after Progressive the Fairy Dance arc might be rebooted or rewritten, since it's the one that most people have qualms with? What would you think of Reki if all this time later he were to reboot it? Let's answer the first one. No, I don't think Fairy Dance needs any rebooting at all, especially because that's a very much complete story. There is no skip narratives going on. It's not establishing the fundamentals of an entire series by skipping huge chunks of the story. There's literally no point to reboot or rewrite or revisit the Fairy Dance arc itself. People have trouble, well, people have troubles with a lot of things. If I say something about other stuff that people have trouble with, some people are probably gonna start swearing at me, but a lot of people do have very stupid qualms with very stupid things in the real world. Let's put it that way. And Fairy Dance arc being rewritten to get rid of some controversial things, it won't fix anything. Oh, that short second bit actually answered the second part of that question as well. I hope that answered your questions. I don't have much to say about it. Like, why reboot it? Just let it be. If it's rebooted, are things gonna change? No, people will still have issues with it because it has the Sword Art Online name on its title, you know? It's gonna be always those loud minority people yelling about, oh, this is bad because Reki's a shit author and stuff. Nothing's gonna change. But that's it for the final weekly, let's keep going with weekly just to wrap things up. Weekly Sword Art Online War of Underworld Q&A for episode 23. Next time we do a Q&A, it's gonna be the Progressive Q&A. I'm gonna answer your questions about Sword Art Online Progressive, which I have collected some from the video already, but since I haven't really started planning the video itself, you still can answer questions about Sword Art Online Progressive over on my Sword Art Online Progressive Explained video, where I talked about the basics of Progressive and what it is. Just make sure to use a hashtag #Gamerturk on the video so I can actually filter for it and find your question, otherwise it gets really hard. But yeah, if you have questions, please do ask them there and not on this video. I will search for that video specifically when looking for questions. Either way, we got more Genshin Impact planned for the future. Hopefully I will finish that Licorice playthrough really soon. I have some other videos planned. I also had some skiing videos planned, as the skiing season would be opened in a month or two. But Corona is destroying Innsbruck right now, so I'm not sure how that's gonna work out. So yeah, that's pretty much it. Thank you very much for being on this journey with me, and I will see you all in the next journey, in the next one. Until then, stay cool.